Sandra Day O'Connor. A Stanford graduate at the top of her class, Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed by President Ronald Reagan to fulfill his promise that if elected, he would appoint a woman to the Supreme Court. She took the position on September 25, 2006. After serving as a Supreme Court Justice for 24 years and 4 months, she stepped down on January 30, 2006. She wanted to be with her husband, who was suffering from Alzheimer's. Despite the encouraging and wonderful gains and the changes for which women have occurred in my lifetime, there is still room to advance and to promote correction of the remaining deficiencies and imbalances. Sandra Day O'Connor. Newly recognized female influence in the music world.
We've got 2 guys going up against 1 female rapper in this category. And the American Music Award goes to Nicki Minaj.
I'm fighting for the girls that never thought they could win. Nicki Minaj. Oprah Winfrey is one of the richest ladies in America, as well as the world. She grew up in a very poor Christian family, moving around between her grandma, mom, and dad. With that said, her childhood was not one of the best, and she delivered a baby when she was 14, but the baby died when he was 2 weeks old. Dr. Maya Angelou inspired Oprah to get her life back on track, and she successfully went to Tennessee State University on a full scholarship. With all these experiences leading up, she became one of the richest women in the world and the most respected. I am where I am because of the bridges that I crossed. Sojourner Truth was a bridge. Harriet Tubman was a bridge. Ida B. Wells was a bridge. Madam C.J. Walker was a bridge. Fannie Lou Hamer was a bridge. Oprah Winfrey. Susan and Elizabeth met at a World Anti-Slavery Conference in London, England, and became fast friends. Instantly connecting on the idea for women to have voting rights, they held their first convention at Seneca Falls, Ohio. It was on July 19th and 20th, 1848. 260 women attended, as well as 40 men, who all signed the Women's Rights Convention for it to be legal for women to vote. They also made the Declaration of Sentiments, where they stated basic women's rights. The most important right stated was for women to vote. From that first official convention, mainly about women and their voting rights, things slowly progressed. The first event engraved on my memory was the birth of a sister. I heard friends remark, "What a pity it is she is a girl." I did not understand that girls were considered an inferior order of beings. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. When women's suffrage was beginning to become a bigger movement, the anti-slavery movement was going on as well. Women helped the anti-slavery movement, hoping that both parties would get the rights they felt they deserved. They thought that by helping the slaves would help them. Sadly, that was not the case. When women were about to get rights, the slaves were being cast aside. An abolitionist for the slaves asked women to step back and let the blacks have their chance. It did not seem fair to the women, so they started clashing in their movements. It became a battle for which movement would become legalized first. Without struggle, there is no success. Frederick Douglass. There were 2 major organizations going on in the late 1800s. There was the National Women's Suffrage Association, created by Elizabeth Stanton and Susan Anthony, which was led by women targeting the national level. The main focus of the NWSA was to enfranchise white women. A rival group formed called the American Women's Suffrage Association, letting Republicans and men lead. They also put black male suffrage as a higher priority than women's suffrage. Both focused on women's suffrage but had different ways of solving the situation. In 1890, the 2 groups formed to one called the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or the NAWSA. Even though they collided the groups, they did not have a strong political ground, and the other women's suffrage group overpowered them. Then the National Association of Colored Women started winning the most power, and the view for why women should vote changed. It was because women were equal as men, but now it said that women should vote because they were different from men. I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction. Most problems are complicated, but to me there is nothing complicated about ordinary equality. Alice Paul. The end of the 1800s was disappointing, but still a small victory for women. The first law for women to vote passed in 1896 in Colorado. This was the first state to pass voting for women in the United States. Then Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah passed the law as well. Some Midwestern states allowed women to have higher authority in schools and municipal elections. Race, however, still segregated women. White women were finally getting recognition, but black women were not, so they continued on with their own group. Suffrage means more than voting. It means power and equal rights to women in all things, property, guardianship, and control of children, and all other rights and privileges that are due to them. W. J. Thompson. Many suffragists came up with new ways to handle the movement. Elizabeth Stanton's daughter, Harriet, founded the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women in 1907. This new group included women from all classes and all backgrounds. The new league joined in with the NAWSA, but the leaders Alice Paul and Lucy Burns of the NAWSA left and formed the Congressional Union, later known as the National Women's Party. Even with the split, women's suffrage was still a huge deal, and people still supported it. By 1912, the law passed in Arizona, California, Kansas, Oregon, and Washington, as well for women to vote. In 1912, women living in Illinois could vote for presidential elections, which was the first in America. On November 8, 1910, Washington State's male electorate ratifies Amendment 6 to the state constitution, granting women the right to vote. 52,299 voted yes, and 29,676 voted no. The House of Representatives passed the 19th Amendment in January 1918. The amendment is also referred to as the Anthony Amendment because the start of all this was thanks to Susan B. Anthony. 1 year and a half later, the Senate passed the 19th Amendment as well. Suffragists worked hard to get the 36 states to ratify the amendment, and finally, on August 26, 1920, women in any state could vote.